Good afternoon, and welcome to the Public Safety and Government Operations Committee meeting. In attendance today, we have myself, Chair of the committee, Mark Conway, representing the 4th District. Councilman Burnett, representing the 8th District, is joining us virtually.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Cohen, representing the 1st District, is also joining us virtually.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilwoman Porter, representing the 10th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Councilwoman Ramos, representing the 14th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And representing the mayor's office, I've got Sophia G., of course, our city administrator, and Preston Lewis, representing the office of the president. This afternoon, the committee will have a hearing on Bill 23-0372, Office of City Stat, Establishment and Administration, for the purpose of establishing the Office of City Stat, defining certain terms, providing for the appointment and confirmation of the director of the office, establishing the power and duties of the office, providing for staff and budget for the office, establishing a data-driven officer for each principal agency of the office, and providing for a special effective date. This bill was introduced on April 3rd, 2023, and it was sponsored by myself, Councilman Conway. And I will say this is a really important bill, I think. Going back to the history of the program, the City Stat program was, of course, founded in 1999 by then Mayor O'Malley, and really set the sort of pace for performance management and government management really across the country, as we've seen many other cities, and in fact also states, emulate and copy that model. I had the fortunate opportunity, and very early in my career, to work in the Office of City Stat, and really had a good opportunity to understand how our city works and the various ways that keep the clock ticking. And I think we've also seen in the course of that time ups and downs in the program. We've seen administrations really lean into the program and have a lot of success, and really expand the program, thinking about new stats and ways to innovate on using the stat model to get things done, to improve city services, to tackle big and complex problems like guns in the city, domestic violence in the city, clean stat, housing stat, you name it. We've tackled it from a number of different perspectives. And we've also seen the program really have its lows at certain points, points when the program was not holding stats for some time, or was barely holding any stats. And in fact, I saw some of that while I was there. Part of the reason why I put this bill forward is because I believe wholeheartedly that City Stat is part of the fabric of city government, and is part of an effective and efficient and smart government. And the beautiful thing about it is that City Stat is very simple. The idea is to use data that we already have to solve problems and to find innovative ways to address issues that we've been dealing with for some time, or new issues that arise. I think also one of the understated parts of City Stat that I think has been really, really helpful from my time as a City Stat analyst and as former director, but even after, it's just there's always someone paying attention to make sure the trains run on time, that the basic things that city government should do are happening and happening well. And if they are not happening well, we can very quickly identify that there's a problem and address that problem with whatever resources that we need, whether it be people, whether it be trucks, whether it be innovative technology, or whatever the case is. What I often found was that the City Stat program was amongst the very first within city government to identify those problems. And I'll say this bluntly as someone who used to work in the mayor's office, it really helped to get ahead of potentially bad stories because we knew that we were having issues. So in drafting this bill, I wanted to think about what we could do to make sure that we didn't have that fluctuation in the City Stat program. We've seen this also in other cities. City Stat comes and goes, or it comes and goes in different iterations. And I remember when I was learning about the program, we went out to Philly. We had a chance to talk to Buffalo. We had a chance to talk to folks at the State Stat and otherwise about the comings and goings of the Stat program. And I think what we want to do here, knowing that CityStat has been so important to the fabric of Baltimore, and because we were the first. We were the first. We were the first. And I think that's really important, that Baltimore innovated in that manner. And I want to make sure that we continue to keep the core tenets of CityStat, the core structure of CityStat going forward. I don't think it's helped us that we've seen it come and go and ebb and flow with different administrations. And I don't think that was anyone's conscious decision. I think it's just the nature of people coming and going in the course of those administrations. So this bill does a couple of things. It first establishes the Office of CityStat, has it report to our new city administrator, which I think is really, really important. I think our administrator needs all the resources you can in order to get the job done and get it done well. And you can't see around corners if you don't have people at those corners to see for you, and I think that's what CityStat can help you do. And I think ultimately it's really important that we have a basic structure for CityStat. This bill does a couple of things. One, it establishes regular meetings with our core agencies, that being fire, that being police, that being housing, that being DPW, HR, finance, and otherwise, that can help us identify the problems and work to resolve those issues over time. And the reality is that the problems that we've been seeing in our agencies are really multifaceted, and having a team to consistently, regularly check in on those issues, monthly at the very least. We've seen this happen bi-weekly in other instances. I think it's a really, really important opportunity to make sure that we're always pushing the ball forward and moving forward as a city. The bill also does something that the current CityStat program and no program before has done before, and it requires regular yearly updates to the council. I think when thinking about drafting this bill, one of the key things that I knew was coming, and we're right around the corner from it, is our budget season, and realizing that this budget is going to be one of the most interesting ones for a while because of the new authority that the City Council has. The problem is the budget process has not really changed all that much yet. We're going to be learning a lot in this first iteration. With regular yearly reports on our core city agencies, we can have an opportunity to give more depth and more insight to what's going on in city agencies, so that when council members are talking about moving money around, should that be a decision that the council wants to make, we can do so with enough information, enough insight, a little bit of the inside baseball, not too much of the inside baseball, but enough that we can make conscious decisions that make sense. And I think with a very tight budget season, we all know how hectic that gets. Having an opportunity to have regular reports at least once a year to the City Council, I think is really, really important. Other than that, I think the bill does a couple other things, including requires performance plans, which would make sure that the agency understands what we're focused on, what we're trying to accomplish. I understand the administration is doing a lot of that work already, which I think is phenomenal. And so this bill does not stop any of that from continuing to happen, but it does create some core structure to the CSTAT program going forward. So with that, really looking forward to hopefully a productive conversation. I think we all want to see our city do really, really well. And I do fundamentally believe that CityStat, a functional and robust CityStat program, is key in that endeavor. So with that, I will hand it over. We'll transition to agency reports, and looking forward to having a robust discussion on the bill. First, I'll turn it over to the I'll turn it over to the city administrator for you, Madam CAO, if you'd like to add anything, or I can turn it over immediately to the Office of Innovation.
I will start. So I think we have a presentation that we're going to walk through. All right. So thank you for the opportunity to testify on Council Bill 23-
Madam CEO, before you begin, can you send this to us?
Oh, yes, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, got it. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on Council Bill 23-0372 and to offer insight into the Scott administration's performance management strategy and infrastructure. I want to start by acknowledging my partners in this very important work. Ariel Giles, the Assistant City Administrator for Performance, Dan Heimowitz, the Director of the Mayor's Office of Performance and Innovation, Amy Perez, who is the Deputy Director of CityStat, and Justin Elsas, the city's first ever Chief Data Officer. We have a best-in-class performance, innovation, and data team right here in the city of Baltimore. Most recently, Beth Blauer, who is with us in chambers today, joined our team on temporary assignment. Beth currently serves as the Associate Vice Provost for Public Sector Innovation at Johns Hopkins University. She is also the former Executive Director and co-founder of the Centers for Civic Impact at Hopkins and former Director of StateStat. Beth is a world-renowned expert in performance management programs, including the STAT model, and lucky for us, she calls Baltimore home. I think it's important that we start from the same frame of reference by defining performance management and discussing how it shows up in the city of Baltimore. So, for the purposes of today's conversation, we're defining performance management as the ongoing, systematic means of monitoring progress towards goals. In Baltimore, we use performance management as a tool to make data-driven program and process improvements, but at its core, our performance management program is about people. People like the firefighters who risk their lives responding to emergencies across our city every single day. Following the tragic death of 3 firefighters responding to a fire in a vacant home, our city's performance team quickly mobilized to support the city administrator's 30-day vacant review, reviewing performance data and identifying opportunities to improve our processes. Our performance management team and chief data officer partnered with Carnegie Mellon and implemented new AI technology to identify buildings for emergency demolition. We are now working to integrate that technology with computer-aided dispatch so our first responders are aware of dangerous buildings before arrival. This is the power of data, technology, and innovation in our city. Recently, we were able to use data to drive decreases in EMS wait times and developed an EMS dashboard. We quickly mobilized our CityStat team to respond to an uptick in youth violence. Our team was able to map recent incidents of youth violence and identified location and time of day trends that ran counter to historical data around youth violence. This data prompted us to strengthen our safe passage strategy for young people traveling to and from schools. I use these examples because they show the real-world impact of data, performance, and innovation work. Now, I want to spend a few minutes talking to you about the Scott administration's holistic approach to performance management, which is anchored by our historic CityStat program, but has evolved and matured to include strategic planning and other core elements. Our performance and innovation framework is powered by 4 key core tools, which you see on the slide deck. One, you have the Mayor's Action Plan, which serves as our enterprise-wide long-range strategic plan. The second piece of our framework are our agency performance plans, which you just mentioned, Councilmember Conway. These serve as an annual planning and tracking tool for our agencies. And then we have CityStat. CityStat provides an avenue for agile, time-bound performance assessments. And then the fourth piece of our strategy is our innovation teams, which are currently funded through a grant from Bloomberg Philanthropies. These teams allow us to tackle intractable challenges using data. Together, these tools allows the mayor's office to manage and improve agency performance, improve service delivery, but most importantly, deliver innovative solutions to some of Baltimore's most pressing challenges. Our model also builds data capacity within our workforce and works to establish a strategy for enterprise-wide data governance. Within this deck, my team will walk through each of the core components of the strategy. So we can proceed in 2 different ways, Councilmember Conway. We can walk through the strategy, or we can pause, have agency reports, and then go back to the deck where we go into a deep dive on the strategy.
let's go through the strategy. We'll get through all reports first.
Okay.
And then.
Okay, fantastic.
Laws report first.
Sure.
That's what you said, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was hearing correctly. Law Department approves the bill with amendments that conform it to the charter. Just to be clear, the charter gives, as most cities do, executive power to the executive, right? So it's up to the executive to decide which programs to implement, how to fund them. I mean, obviously you're part of the budget process, but just because you appropriate money to something doesn't mean it has to be spent. So, I mean, that's most American governments. So this just conforms it to meet the language of the charter, and then the amendments we have, and other than those issues, we could approve what would be amended for form and legal sufficiency. I'm happy to take any questions or go in depth in the amendments or whatever you want.
We'll come back to I have a lot of questions, but
Sure.
We'll come back to the questions for your report
Okay.
after. Thank you. I guess we'll go next to the Department of Finance, and I just want to note we just got the finance report literally a minute ago. I know we're always working on getting reports back. I think just from I've only partially been able to read the report, just from a ability to be thoughtful as a committee. Whatever we can do to get reports on time is just really important. I know this bill's been out there for, over a month. I don't think I need to hammer that point anymore, but go ahead.
Mara James, Assistant Budget Director. Yeah, we were trying to meet the 30-day deadline, and then the hearing got announced at 30 days about, so apologies for that. We stand by our report. We oppose this legislation. We support the intent, but are concerned about the cost, as well as the implications about coordination of performance management. So I'll walk through a few of those that are outlined in our report. So we anticipate a fiscal cost of about $1.9 million annually for the city. This includes personnel and supplies for the Office of City Stat, as well as personnel for the principal agencies. Based on our analysis, we think that we would need 5 new positions for the office. This would include a director, 2 analysts, an accountant, and an HR generalist. And that assumes that the current city stat staff, which of 1 deputy and 3 analysts, would transition out of OPI into the Office of City Stat for a total staffing of 9 positions. So those costs would be, plus some supplies, would be about $720,000. Then looking at the principal agencies, the legislation names 10 principal agencies that are required to have a data-driven officer and establish internal city stat process. Several of the agencies participate in city stat already and have internal data teams, but there's the health department and fire department that previously had stat meetings that don't currently. And planning and finance have not had those stat meetings before, so those agencies don't have an internal process established. So we would anticipate that each agency may require 1 position, so that could be up to 10 positions depending on the current staffing and structures, which would be an estimated cost of $1.3 million. The other considerations that we wanted to flag are the office possibly having the duplicative work with OPI, specifically the agency performance management agreements, aligning with the current agency performance plan work that is underway by OPI. In addition, establishing 2 offices that are focused on performance management, where we have OPI in the mayor's office and then this Office of City Stat, may cause challenges for agencies and the administration, aligning and maintaining processes. We want to ensure that there's really that flexibility for the mayor and city administrator to implement the most effective performance management strategy and coordinate in a centralized way. The other aspect is just the prescriptive nature of the legislation and writing out how the office must operate, requiring a certain number of meetings, memos, and agendas at certain times. So again, just enabling flexibility to choose the forum, to choose the method based on the needs of the agencies of the city at that time. and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Madam CEO, actually, before we get there, we also have a report from the Office of Performance and Innovation.
Mr. Chair, committee members, Dan Heimowitz, Director of the Mayor's Office of Performance and Innovation, which includes CityStat. OPI stands by our bill report. We're not in support of Bill 23-0372. But while we oppose the bill in its current form, we acknowledge areas of alignment, including the need to strengthen the management and oversight of agency performance, and we're looking forward to working collaboratively with the council to advance our shared goals. We have more to say, but it's embedded in the presentation that City Administrator Leach referred to, so I'll save more for them. But yeah, thank you.
Okay. Madam CEO, it's yours.
Sure. So if we can pull up the presentation, please. So as I mentioned in my open remarks, this is just a graphic that shows what our current performance management infrastructure looks like within the city. And what I will, what we will detail in the slides to follow is a comprehensive performance management strategy that includes the work that we do through CityStat, but also provides an opportunity to do some strategic long-range planning. Also provides space for innovation in digital services and the work that we are doing there, and adds annual performance plans. These things together will help to improve our city service delivery. In addition, what you'll also see within our performance management strategy is that we have this enterprise focus on workforce, on our data capacity within all of the agencies within the government. So that's why you see this, this circle that talks about how data is really embedded throughout our entire performance management strategy, and how we are deeply focused on ensuring that our workforce also has data capacity, and we are deeply focused on data governance. So we'll go to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to the team. In my remarks, I talked a bit about how we have this best-in-class team, and I want to emphasize that. We really do, between our chief data officer, our assistant city administrator, and our director of performance and innovation, they are world-class. And they work with cities across the world who are building performance management systems similar to the one that we are building here in the city of Baltimore. And what you see on this slide, and what I'll have the team detail, are just some of the partnerships that we've been able to forge, some of the acknowledgments and the awards that we've been given because of the fact that we have and are building a world-class performance management system right here in the city of Baltimore. So Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, Chair Conway, members of the Public Safety Government Operations Committee. My name is Ariel Giles. I'm Assistant City Administrator for Performance Technology, and I want to start by just highlighting a couple of things on this slide. You'll see a few of the academic partners that we've worked with listed there, but you'll also see a couple of things. The Baltimore recognition as a What Works City, a silver certification. That's a national recognition program for cities that are using data-driven practices in their local governance. And so under this mayor's leadership, we've achieved a silver designation. Also, just wanted to acknowledge our participation as having applied and been accepted into the Bloomberg City Data Alliance. We've partnered in that data alliance with a few different opportunities that have been presented to us, and so we'll continue to work with them, and that recognition and acceptance was in alignment with our use of data. We can go to the next slide. This is on this slide, we wanted to highlight the city's recognition as being on par with and ahead of many cities as far as our use of data practices. You'll see on the right side the 8 categories that What Works Cities uses to highlight where cities are. And you'll see that on those gold, yellow lines, the city of Baltimore is outperforming many cities in terms of executive leadership and leading through the use of data. And so this is important to note that we're on par with or above comparator cities when it comes to our current state of practices. And so, of course, we're always striving for more, but we've already been recognized as a nationally, and we'll continue to use those practices and grow our use of data. If we can go to the next slide.
Okay, before you move on, I realize this is a very long presentation.
We're going to move swiftly.
Okay.
Yep, I'll move pretty swiftly through these. Next, you'll see the Mayor's Action Plan. As mentioned, the Mayor's Action Plan is the strategic roadmap for action in this administration. It was launched in December of 2021. It's organized around 5 pillars, which are building public safety, clean and healthy communities, responsible stewardship of city resources, equitable neighborhood development, and prioritizing youth. Each of these pillars has 5 to 7 goals, and each of those goals has several actions that the administration is focused on achieving over the mayor's first term. The plan was developed as an offshoot of some of the transition committee work where the mayor and team engaged citizens, nonprofits, business partners, and anchor institutions across the city. These recommendations were then taken in, a review by the senior team and senior agency leaders, and encapsulated into the 180 actions that are currently in that plan. Each action is assigned an agency and action owner, and we require agencies to go through a project management process to detail how and when they would achieve these actions. We require them to report on their progress on these actions regularly, and we've used this document to also be the basis of some of the budget enhancement activities, so meaning agencies were required to justify their enhancements by how they aligned with the strategic goals in this plan. So this strategic plan, the Mayor's Action Plan, is the guiding framework that other performance operations initiatives feed into. If we can go to the next slide. I'll be very brief here. I think the point of this slide was just to highlight the evolution of performance planning programs. You'll see on the left in the 70s and 80s the renewed focus by the private sector on performance management, where you get processes such as Six Sigma. But then, as has been referenced in this hearing already, CityStat, CompStat, these performance stat type programs came to emerge in the 90s. Right now, as was mentioned earlier, CityStat is about 25 years old. And so since then, there's been new evolutions in how performance management is used in both public and private sector organizations. You'll see notably the use of open data emerging in the 2000s, also the rise of analytics offices in the 2010s. We know that big data is here, and data science is now used typically across the board. And then also you'll see public dashboards having emerged throughout the pandemic, and that response through. And so an example would be, JHU's a coronavirus public dashboard, but in general, cities and states have been using performance public dashboards as a way to have a conversation with the community about performance management. So we can keep going. So here we want to note, just as stated, there's an evolution of practices. The modern practice around these CityStat style performance meetings is to convene decision makers around a very clear purpose: crime reduction, snow removal, emergency management, school openings. This is taken from the performance management guide from Bloomberg City for Government Excellence. I think it speaks to how this administration has chosen to engage with the CityStat program. And so, as mentioned, in line with those best practices, the CityStat program is used to problem solve complex multi-agency challenges, while also holding individual agencies accountable. So that really speaks to how we've used the CityStat program in this administration. It's been very intentional to use it to focus on a collaborative approach to problem solving with multiple agencies and stakeholders in the room to solve an issue. We also have engaged in this administration in what is a new process, which is agency performance planning. And so I'll talk a little bit more about agency performance planning, and then Dan will speak a little bit more about CityStat. So what you'll see here is a example on the left side of what an agency performance plan may look like. But as mentioned, this is a new and historic initiative for the city. Agency performance plans is really a best practice in local government, and they help ensure that regardless of the administration, we're regularly monitoring agency performance and service delivery. Agencies are required to develop KPIs and targets for all the services that they provide. They're required to update their progress on those indicators throughout the year, and senior leaders will review that progress through performance review meetings throughout the year. Agency performance plans are currently being drafted. The agencies that are mentioned in the legislation that we're discussing today are part of that first round of 16 plans that have already been drafting KPIs and are slated to be live this summer. I believe we plan to have 32 of those plans live by the end of the year. I'd just like to note that we're taking performance planning out of what you may be aware of in the budget context, where we have these, I think we had over 500 measures in the budget book, and they review once annually throughout the budget process. We're taking it out of that. We're starting to do performance management and monitoring for the sake of performance management, and not only tying it to the budget process. So what that means is that we're cutting down the number of measures we have, but we're increasing the frequency which they're updated, and we're reviewing those and holding agencies accountable to their progress towards the indicators that are in that plan. Those plans will be public. The updated information that agencies provide about their progress towards their stated goals will also be public, and that will be available online. And now I'll pass it to Dan Heimowitz, the Director of the Office of Performance Innovation, to continue with the city stat portion.
Thank you. So we now talk about CityStat itself. So first, just talking about how we're using CityStat today. I'm not going to go through every single bullet point here, but the things to really highlight about how we're emphasizing stat here in this administration is, first of all, as we noted, in line with best practices, really convening around issue areas or challenge areas as opposed to sort of static agency stats. We look to bring together multiple stakeholders in a collaborative process. And increasingly, an emphasis under City Administrator Leach is going to be agility and responding to specific challenges in a nimble way. Many aspects of stat are in line with how the method works. We do data and analysis, produce those in a pre-meeting memo, hold the meeting, and then codify action items that are distributed at the end of the meeting so that there is a clear understanding and accountability from meeting to meeting. This is a look at the various stats and performance management processes that are being operated today. Again, I'm not going to talk through all of these, and some of these are a bit different from one another, and the ones in gray we also want to bring forward as, for the most part, those are stats being operated by agencies themselves, so internal stats for them. And just to note, you'll see that there are stats aligned to each of Mayor Scott's 5 pillars. All right, so I'll get into a few examples of particular stats, sort of how they work, and again, trying to illustrate this approach that City Administrator Leach has talked about and that ACA Giles has also spoken to. So CleanStat, that is one of our bigger stats. It's a multi-agency process focused on various city government cleaning functions, everything from routine services like trash pickup to a focus in the spring and summer months on grounds maintenance. Want to highlight some important progress that has been made through this process, including a significant effort coordinated by the CityStat team to codify and strengthen the agencies in the city who handle mowing, their quality assurance processes. Throughout the summer in 2022, we rigorously followed this in CleanStat, assessed this, looked at the quantitative data. We also used our CityStat inspections to physically visit a lot of the sites of the work that was being covered and reviewed that in meetings. And as a result, saw a far cleaner summer 2022, which included 2,000 fewer overdue cleaning work orders than the prior summer. Still much work to do on that front, but important progress that we saw last year and that we're looking to continue. Late invoice payment stat. Again, this is a good example of how we're convening around particular challenges or issue areas. This is a meeting where we bring together many agencies to review our efforts around prompt payment of invoices to vendors. There is a made meeting where we review data, and I'm going to actually just quickly pull up the dashboard that we utilize in this meeting, if I can pull it up. Here's just a quick look at it. This is the dashboard we use to guide that work and review together. We have a main meeting, and City Administrator Elish has also complemented that with a Tiger Teams process so that we're giving extra attention and work with agencies where we think that extra effort is helpful. And we are seeing important progress. And again, much more work to do, but since September, a 72% reduction in the value of late invoices and 53% reduction in the number of late invoices since that time. Again, much more work to do, but this process is starting to drive important change. And of course, there's police stat, again, one of our other major stats. This is something that we hold every other week for 2 hours. That meeting is led by Mayor Scott. It is a really important part of the city's efforts around violence reduction. We highlight here that we are also focused in on data and metrics around the group violence reduction strategy. You can see some snapshots from our meeting memos on the right-hand side of your slide. And again, there has been some improvements to date this year related to violence, including so far a 15% decrease in homicide victims so far year to date. Again, lots of work to do, but do want to highlight that the police stat process is central to the agency's efforts to reduce violence. Okay, so that was agency performance plans and city stat, but as City Administrator Leach mentioned, we do have these additional teams that work on systematic problem solving and innovation. City Administrator?
Yep. So, Councilmember, I see your face. So,
Thank you.
So again, but the reason why we wanted to walk through this detailed presentation is because we have so much positive work that is happening within our performance team. And what I do recognize from conversations with each of you is that we need to showcase that work, and we need to brief you all on all of the amazing things that are happening on our performance team. I do want to highlight data and highlight digital very quickly. So if you will allow us, can we give 5 minutes?
5 minutes is great.
All right, and we're going to run through this in 5 minutes, and then we can take your questions.
So I'll be quick here. Our innovation team uses a human-centered design-based approach to innovation. That is the model. Again, in the interest of time, won't go too in-depth on that. Right now, the team is working on a major challenge area related to improving hiring and retention for hard-to-fill jobs in city government. This is a major challenge, not just in Baltimore, not just in the country, but globally. And so a really important issue to think about what innovative strategies we might work on in this area. We're starting with mechanics, but hope to use what we learn and what we work on there for other areas. Also highlight other key efforts the team has worked on in the past, including the development of the Baltimore Health Corps program. I will pass it off to my colleague, the Chief Data Officer, to continue on to talk about the digital services team.
Great, thank you, Dan. Good afternoon, Justin Alsace, Chief Data Officer. Just wanted to highlight, and I will be very brief, if I can skim through these really quickly. Digital services, brand new team. 2 of the 4 team members only started about just over a month ago, but we're already delivering. So this team is about using kind of modern software delivery approaches to improve the digital experience of our residents, reducing barriers, creating equitable service delivery for our residents. They're already delivering by creating this special event permit application, For those of you, everyone has constituents, I'm sure, that have gone through the special event permitting process. So really excited to be launching this. Dan, you want to go to the next? Yep, so just a couple of other core areas that really kind of speak to the ways in which we can improve performance that aren't just about measuring performance. First among those is data governance. You can see here there's a number of different areas covered in data governance. I want to highlight a couple of things here, though. One, Councilmember Burnett just the other day introduced legislation around facial recognition. This is a classic example of data governance, in fact, and we ought to be having that conversation now here in Baltimore about the ways in which data are used for our residents and by city to ensure that it's both effective and also equitable. Another area of data governance that Councilman Conway, I'm sure you've encountered from your time as Deputy Director for CityStat is around data quality. We constantly get questions about where a certain number came from, how a certain number was calculated. These things always kind of come up in meetings. Data governance is one way we can address that is by having more formal policies in place. This is also an area I think where we'd be open to collaborating. We should discuss further where and how some of these data governance policies actually get implemented in legislation. Dan, do you want to go to the next slide? Couple of examples of actual problems that we're trying to solve with data governance. I just mentioned, data quality and lineage issues, so we know where these numbers actually come from. We have a new process in place now. It's been soft launched, but we're now starting to track our MPIA requests. So anytime a resident submits an MPIA request, an agency will be tracking that through Salesforce as a 311 request. We sometimes still have issues around ownership and access to the data that lives in our technology. So creating boilerplate language to try and ensure we have ease of access to the data. I mentioned Councilman Burnett's AI legislation a moment ago. Dan, do you want to go to the next slide? Open data and transparency, obviously a huge component of the work of Mayor Scott's administration. I'm highlighting here just a couple of examples, recent examples. This continues to be an area where we want to put forth data products that help residents interpret the data, and we can demonstrate how government is delivering core services to them instead of just dumping raw data out there. Dan, you can go to the... Workforce and capacity, I'll just mention two things. One is our Data Academy program. This is actually geared towards frontline workers and folks who have no familiarity with data. We all know how to measure the performance of our city services here in City Hall. What does that look like to push more data and more information out to our frontline workers so that they can make better decisions in the field? That's why Netflix doesn't send you a monthly report on what you watched. They, in real time, are recommending what you should watch the next time you're going to watch something. So what we're looking to do is find more ways to build up a data literate workforce and improve city service performance that way. Dan, I think there's maybe two more things we can mention. Obviously, our Data Fellows program, bringing kind of entry-level data talent. A number of agencies have hired Data Fellows permanently. So this has been a really great program for building data talent out in city government. Last thing I'll mention, CA Leach mentioned the example of identifying collapsed rooftops using artificial intelligence. These machine learning tools, yes, we want to do it equitably, and that's where data governance and potentially even legislation can bring to bear. But we also know that they can really heighten our effectiveness and our efficiency. So looking for other opportunities for that kind of thing. For instance, the way we identify nuisance properties, or the way that we kind of prioritize or respond to open service requests in response to violent public safety issues. I'll stop there. I hope that was brief enough. But thanks for the time.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. I will say this, and all that is great, and I'm glad we're doing all that stuff. This bill is actually separate from all that, from many of the things that we brought up. And so I want to be very clear. What we're trying to accomplish here with this bill is not to recreate the data mechanisms that we have or the data science that we're using to innovate on city processes or anything like that. That is not what CityStat is. Certainly CityStat could be outfitted to do stuff like that, but that is not the process necessarily. In fact, the CityStat process is very simple. It uses simple data that's already available and uses basic analysis and regular follow-up and follow-through to tackle issues. This work is great, and I think this work would be able to continue in exactly the same capacity under OPI in a way that is hopefully continuing to be effective. So I just want to set those things apart. Setting up this structure as we've outlined in the bill, it is separate from that. I just want to make sure that everyone in the room understands that.
Yes, so I appreciate that. I think what we are contending is that it cannot be separate, is that these things together are how you improve city service delivery. And so it is CityStat, and CityStat is a core part of our model, right? Like, it is an anchor. But what we have done over the past few years, and especially in this administration, is we have matured and we have evolved to include other things like strategic planning, like annual performance plans, like CityStat, as well as innovation teams. I think you have to take all of those things in concert to really start to deliver the disruptive and transformational type of improvements that we need to see in the city of Baltimore. And while CityStat is an important piece of that model, I think it can't work alone. I think you need a team that's focused on innovation. I think you need agency performance plans, right? I think you need a strategic plan that outlines a broad long-term vision. And so again, that is why we showed kind of that circular graphic, is because that is the model. And if you take a piece of that out, it's incomplete. Right? And so I think that is the reason why we wanted to show you kind of holistically and broadly how we look at performance management as a whole and not just the CityStat model. But again, CityStat is a core component. It is an anchor to our model, but it cannot be taken without looking in totality at the other pieces of the model.
I appreciate all those pieces, and what I'm not saying that CityStat would supplant. Those are two separate conversations, and I think they actually work in beautiful concert together. So I want to be very clear. This is not saying that CityStat would take over those responsibilities or not interact with those responsibilities. In fact, the idea here is that they would inform what we should be focused on. CityStat would be making sure the trains arrive on time, identifying aberrations in data and through regular follow-up, which would help us figure out where we should be taking these data teams and attacking with all the information and insight that we have. So I don't disagree with anything you said, and it shouldn't live in its own ecosystem. Part of the reason why I structured the bill, and actually we're going to open up to questions, but part of the reason why I structured the bill the way I structured it and left it very broad is because I realized there are so many other things that go into our ability to leverage data and leverage processes and leverage regular follow-ups and follow-throughs that go beyond just this basic structure. But if this does not happen, problems fester, or problems come up and we don't know about it until it's on the news. I think that's the difference that I want to separate here. And I was sort of going through, and I have a number of questions for finance, a number of questions for the OPI team and CAO, and so we'll get into that. But sort of the financial analysis that we have here, it estimates that these positions cost $130,000 per position. I can tell you, as a CityStat analyst coming in, I made 50. The degree of analytical experience required for a basic CityStat analyst is not $130,000. And sure, if we think that it's going to yield something so much more significant, maybe we can have that conversation. But the original design of the CityStat program operated with $1 million, the whole shebang.
So can I interrupt there?
Sure.
So When were you in the city stat program? Like in the
2012 to 2017.
Okay, so what I would say is, of course, salaries, of course, have increased. I think our starting salary is around what, $70,000, or we're trying to get it to $70,000.
It's a little higher.
Yeah, it's a little higher than $70,000, but of course, you're talking about salary and fringe, so that is going to be over $100,000 per position. But again, it's going to cost more than $1 million to operate a stat program at any level of scale. And then if we want folks who, I mean, while you want to have entry-level people that are in your stat programs, you're also going to want some mid-level talent as well, right? Our chief data officer was once in our stat program and is a data scientist, for example, because you're going to need to do analysis that is going to require a bit more experience. So just to add some color to the numbers that you're looking at.
I fully appreciate that as a person who started out as a regular analyst, and surely I made more money after that. But I think the idea is the startup is you're getting young people that can count, that can do some basic analysis, can pull together cogent thoughts, use basic data, and it really is a lot of folks who are getting their feet wet in data. They don't have to be experts, but have some basic understanding of how to leverage data. And then you have some of those senior folks that may have experience with R or otherwise that can really dig into stuff. But I would say, you know, with the structure that we currently have, I think Justin and his team, like that's where you would see a lot of that experience, and you would see far more ability and higher pay there. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I would just say that 130,000 you're noting is including salary and OBCs, like the city administrator said, but also that's the specific focus for the folks that are in the agencies. So that is, from our reading of the bill, while they're not managing the city stat program, they're having to coordinate with the Office of City Stat and coordinate for their agency an internal city stat program as well. So there is a higher, my interpretation of the bill is that there was a higher kind of level of demand of that work outside of the city stat analyst position itself. So that's how we assessed that position.
Sure. And then for the current stat program, what is the current budget?
One moment, sorry.
And how many staff do they currently have now?
It's currently a deputy director and 3 analysts.
And then that team is also augmented by data fellows.
So I think a couple things here, and I know Mara is pulling together the actual budget today. Leveraging that, I'm looking back to sort of my experience, and I can only speak from my time at CityStat. We had 5 analysts, including the deputy director, which was me at the time, and the director. So we're talking about a slight increase in the size of the team. It'd be two more positions. And when looking at those 2 positions, I do want to push back a little bit on the salaries that are outlined here. For 2 positions, we're estimating roughly $250,000. Feels high. Now we may need that, I don't know, but I do have some questions about the numbers here. And then there is an outlining for a human resources person and an accountant. As an office, do they necessarily need those 2 roles, or could they not have those roles taken care of under the CAO's office or otherwise?
I don't have a human resources officer.
Okay, so you don't have an office with a CEO with a.
Well, I'm within the mayor's office.
Could the mayor's office take on that responsibility? So we have offices across the city that don't have those positions.
Well, most offices do, actually. So most agencies do.
Yeah.
I think within the mayorality, we do have kind of a shared HR function. But again, like those activities will have to be taken up by someone. So if the city stat office doesn't get an HR officer, then the mayor's office does, or a part-time person, because this is now increased capacity. The other thing that I want to offer regarding, go ahead.
To that point,
Yes.
We're talking about the only change to this office is 2 positions. We're adding 2 analysts, and we're assuming that we would need an HR person and an accountant.
if it is its own office, right? Like we are creating an agency essentially.
Sure.
If it is an agency, it needs
It is not an
infrastructure.
agency, it's an office.
It is, okay, so it's an office with a confirmed director. So they're going to need HR support. They're going to need to recruit and onboard staff. They are going to need to build a budget. They're going to.
So we very recently dealt with this, and I think this argument made a lot of sense. In a recent bill we talked about for OEM, and that didn't make sense because we were going to make that an agency. That didn't make sense. But OEM reports to fire and uses fire's resources to do the hiring, firing, so on and so forth. It has HR through fire, it has accounting through fire. So in a structure like this, it shouldn't add in those two additional positions at all if we had it nestled under another office.
Yep.
Excuse me, under another agency.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things we probably have to work through on that, and this I actually might need help from Nina and the MOGR team. So if this is not an office, so within the bill, I think we list that this director would be confirmed by the council. So if this
No.
is now an office by the mayoralty, is that not in there? It is in there.
Okay.
And so if this is now under the mayoralty, then it's not going to be confirmed by the council. But I do think, again, whenever we add new offices under the mayoralty, we're going to have to find a way to absorb the increased need for things like human resources as well as some of the financial needs that we might have. But again, I think this is one of those things that we can talk about offline as well.
Sure. Yeah, I think point being here, I think it's really, really, really important that we figure out how to do this sensibly. And, I think there's a lot to be worked out here and how to do that. But, yeah, I'll leave that there. And I, because I'm only getting this finance report today, literally before this meeting, it's kind of hard to dig into some of the weeds here, so we don't necessarily need to do that. But I think it's important that we are reasonable in those expectations, because I have a lot of concerns about some of the pieces here.
Yep. The last thing that I'll offer about the positions and some of the costs, I think one, what you're hearing from us is we already do this. We have an Office of Performance Management, and we have a city stat team. And so again, it would literally just be pulling out our team and making its own office. We do stats, multiple times a week. But to that piece about the cost. So I too was a part of a city stat program. I've actually been a part of multiple performance programs in multiple cities. And what I will tell you is that while you do want young and agile talent to come into the door, you also want to build lasting infrastructure. And you need more than bean counters to build that lasting infrastructure, right? So you want to create that pipeline. You want to bring in those young professionals and give them their first opportunity within government, but you also need to bring in that mid-level and senior level talent who will build lasting infrastructure. I think some of the challenges that we've seen with fits and starts with the program over multiple administrations is because we didn't have that, right? And that is what we are building within this within this office. The team that you actually see, that is moving out of the City Stat program into other agencies are our data fellows. Our core team are pretty mature data professionals that are able to do the thorough analytics that we need, and they have built lasting infrastructure.
Yeah, I think I want to get to some more of the nuts and bolts of the bill, questions about that, but I'll say this. You can't go into any agency and not see City Stat alumni in the city. They're kind of littered all over the place. I think what you find is that analysts over time, they start out in City Stat, kind of learn the basics, and then agencies pick them up and find them very helpful in leadership roles because they understand some of the bigger picture. So while I agree, I think there is certainly a need for middle-level folks. I think going to our conversation yesterday and our hearing yesterday, it's a really important opportunity to groom talent and groom leadership, but then just groom people who understand the bigger picture and can leverage data to better manage our agencies. So I've been talking a lot. I want to give my colleagues an opportunity for questions, Councilwoman Ramos and Councilwoman Porter thereafter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before going into my question, I need to correct some history here. In 1989, this is how old I am, I don't look that old, there was a major movement in our city called the Neighborhood Congress, okay? There was organizing across the city because at that time we had actual paid organizers. And I was one of them, and we worked diligently and thought, wait a second, there's an open seat for mayor that year because Mayor Schmoke was not running. So can we come up with a neighborhoods agenda for that election? And we did through what we called solutions forums. Here's an idea. This was forums where you could not complain. Can you imagine? Oh my God. You had to bring in a solution to a problem. And they were so successful. We had all of these various solutions. We had this big meeting at City College, 2,000 people there, if not more, ranking all of these things. And what was the top thing? Performance and transparency. Okay? So we then started working with the various candidates, et cetera, about what this would look like if we actually knew what was going on in city government and could hold city government accountable. Okay? Unfortunately, all my notes are in the UB archive, so I can't get any more specific than that. But as one of the leaders of that movement, it was really clear that that was something that residents really wanted. There was nothing like that. So Mayor O'Malley, I think, already had CityStat in his head as he was campaigning, but certainly utilized that opportunity to really move forward this idea, particularly after he won the election. And so many of us were on this transition team. We were moving forward that way. Then I transitioned into being the director of the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance, a founding director. And so the mayor, I remember many meetings with the mayor's office, and our office, just trying to get the basic data. Like, what is it that people are going to want? Because BNIA was really about looking at those outcomes, about how neighborhoods are doing and changing, whereas CityStat was very much performance-based. So when we talk about CityStat, we're talking about this from if this was really part of a grassroots, plus it was Mayor O'Malley's, sort of thinking about how this should work, right? So you're also, I bring that up also because you're actually talking to two purists, CityStat purists, who, we actually saw when agencies were up there and they had to sweat it out because they weren't making their performance metrics, right? We have a lot more technology now. We have a lot more opportunity. I still believe that looking at, bringing in agency heads, looking at their performance metrics and really trying to figure out why things aren't getting done or reward when they are getting done is really important. And so that's one of the things about this bill that's in there. And I believe you're moving in that direction with an agency performance plans. And hopefully you do that, because I do think that what we saw during that time was, first of all, accountability that there wasn't before, but also that there was the opportunity for feedback and the agency saying, look, I need more resources if you want me to do this. Or I need more people, or I need this, or I need that. And so, and it was done in a very intentional kind of way. And so obviously I think that the way that CityStat is working now, and I'm thrilled that we're actually back to statting this way, because I think that's important. I do think that adding that piece about literally once a month, once a quarter, sort of really digging in on some of these things and looking at what the agency's performance are and how they're doing is important. I also think, as you all know, the data is really important. Closed 311s is not accurate, right? Because we know when a consumer gets a call, that gets an email that says the 311 is closed, it's not closed. It got transferred to another agency. I saw that in the preliminary budget, that closed 311 is one of the indicators. So we have to really think about how that's actually, like, as we're looking at the data, I know you all don't use closed 311s, but that's what we are seeing, and that's what the neighbors are seeing, and that's what constituents are seeing. So it's important that we're actually looking at what's the public really seeing, and how can we have that, conversation about the fact that you are measuring, that the city is measuring progress, and what progress are we seeing. So, all that to say is I think that I'm hopeful that this process that we're going through right now will help us with, sending that message out, because part of what BNIA was doing and part of what CityStat was doing at the time, there's actually a really great article written about both back during that time, was to really reflect about, what's really happening in the neighborhoods and how the performance of the city is reflecting there as well. And making those changes in the neighborhoods. I'm not saying that the CityStat should be tracking maternal child health, because that's being tracked in other ways. But I am saying that, there may be, some ways that city, and let me just also say that, in our travel, I guess I'll speak for myself in my district, a lot of people, talk about city services. And I think, CAO Leach, we've talked about this before in terms of, if people don't feel good about city service delivery, they're not going to feel good about the city, right? And so having a way through the CityStat process that we had been going through, me at the beginning and him sort of the next phase, is the way to tell that story, right? And doing it in a better way. So I'll get to my question. I guess my main question is sort of, is the hesitancy about this bill more around the sort of agency month to month, or is it more just around the, taking CityStat out of OPI? Because I actually don't see it out of OPI. I mean, I see it as like the same people that are in CityStat would be the office, right? Isn't that how you see it, yeah. Right? So I'm just kind of wondering exactly given what I just sort of talked about and what I think the councilman was talking about, what if there's aspects of what we're envisioning that are, really the issue. I mean, it sounds like you're going into the agency performance plans and you'll be doing, holding accountable, but I'm not sure what the...
So I have lots of thoughts, and we may have to do a part two.
Sure.
So I think there are a couple of things, right? I too am an alumni of a STAT program. So let me start there. There are absolute alumni across this government and really across the country, right, that have been a part of these STAT models. So I say that, I preface my statement with that. I want us to be very cautious about overly glorifying the STAT program, right? There were some unintended consequences that we saw from STAT programs from the early 90s when they became very popular, right? There was this idea around this malicious compliance to measures that ultimately caused harm, for example, right? Some of the things that we were tracking, especially when it came to public safety and the like. When you create a culture like that, there are going to be unintended consequences. There are going to be people that are going to do whatever they have to do to when they come. I mean, look, I
want to be careful.
Okay.
I want to be careful here because those issues are issues, but
totally
those are not. That is leadership. That's leadership. That's making a leadership decision. And if you're not thinking about certain things in those leadership decisions, that is up to us. That is up to you. That is up to leadership to be thinking about the implications of forcing in that direction. So,
yes.
But that said, data can be used to accomplish anything.
Absolutely.
Anything.
Yeah. So again, we have to acknowledge it, right? I think, and that is my purpose in raising that, is that I don't want to overly romanticize these programs as though they didn't cause some harm, and we have matured, right? I think the program that we have is one that is more intentional and more thoughtful about the types of compliance efforts that we put in place and the measures that we put in place. To speak to the hesitation is this already happens. It already exists. We, in this administration, I think from very early on, even during the pandemic, we were still finding a way to do stats. Stats have been a core part of our program. CityStat is alive and well. It has not died in the Scott administration. If anything, we've brought it back and complemented that program with even more tools and infrastructure so that we are creating a holistic performance management infrastructure within the city. My challenge around pulling CityStat out and making its own office is it takes away from the overall performance management structure and strategy. It takes a tool, which is CityStat. It takes a program, which is CityStat. Well, again, that is how I see the bill.
So I think, once again, part of the reason why I disagree with that statement is because it would literally report to you as CAO.
It currently does.
Yeah, exactly. So what you decide to do with that office, who you would decide to put it next to or work with is totally at the discretion of you as CAO. So I don't agree at all with that characterization of the office. It doesn't take that office away from anybody. It literally
It takes it from performance. So right now we have an Office of Performance and Innovation where these tools live. City Stat is a performance management program. It is a performance management tool. If we take it out of the Office of Performance and Innovation and make it its own make it its own office, what are we then saying about the Office of Performance Management and Innovation, right? Like it is a part of a larger performance management program.
I'll ask this question of the law department. Is there anything that stops the CAO from having that be a subsidiary under the Office of Performance Innovation? If we established an office of City Stat and said that that office reports to the CAO, is there anything that stops that office from being a part of the Office of Performance Innovation?
So
I had
my confusion would be, it would be an office within an office.
Right.
Versus.
I think that the key here, and the reason why we're establishing it as, it could be a crew if we want to call it a crew. I don't care what we call it. The whole purpose of the bill is to create a structure that requires regular check-ins with core city agencies such that we know what's going on and we are addressing issues before they blow up in our face. That's all. It doesn't matter if we call it an office or if we call it anything. I really don't care. Mm-hmm. We can call it an agency, we can call it an office, we can have a report to anybody, but as long as you have the authority and control over the City Stat team mm-hmm. and can make sure that they're giving you correct insights on how day-to-day operations are going in city agencies using data, analytics, maps, that is all that matters at the end of the day.
So, and I think that's what we tried to demonstrate during the presentation is that I do, right?
So the problem, and I think the difference between what we're trying to pull together in this bill and I think what we're doing right now is what we're doing right now, and I'll go back to the presentation. There are 5 stats. Only one is focused on, so we have, actually, I'm just going to let you explain, Dan, what are the stats we're holding right now? Because I'm looking at this slide 15, and there's a lot of boxes, but, and I mean very specifically, not stats held within city agencies, because that's a separate thing. And part of the reason why I think it's important that we separate the two is because city agencies, they're not going to be looking at the bigger picture. You have them working in a silo. That is just the nature of a city agency. I think it's really important that from a centralized perspective, either under the CAO or under the mayor traditionally, there's someone that's weaving it all together.
Yep. So Dan will walk through the stats. So I just want to paint the picture for you about how this operates, right? So we have core stats, which Dan will walk through, that we operate out of the Office of Performance and Innovation. Mm-hmm. I also have the ability, and within my short time in the role, have added additional stats. So I've talked about how I want my team to be agile, right? They talked about the Tiger teams and these agile teams. So when we started seeing that uptick in youth violence, I immediately turned to Dan. I said, I want a stat. I need a stat on youth violence. It doesn't need to be a part of police stat. It's a completely separate stat, different people in the room.
And the bill allows that. The bill creates space for that.
Right, so I hear you, but what I'm trying to explain to you about the stat model is that, yes, you might see some core stats on that in the PowerPoint, but we also have the ability, and I do, add additional stats. When there is a real-time issue that is coming up and I need to do a deep dive, then that is what I do. I call on my OPI team, we pull together a stat. So this wasn't really, it didn't operate as a stat, it operated as a cross-functional team, but recycling. same model of pulling agency directors and leaders together with our data folks, with our innovation team to solve a hard problem, right? That is how we were able to really drill in on the issues that we were having around recycling. So what I want to be very careful of is like relegating this only to city stat. This is a culture, right? We have a stat culture within this government. We have we are building a culture of using data to drive performance and to drive decision making. And I would say, under me in particular, because of the fact that I have a very strong performance background, I have really been pushing the team around how we can be even more agile and move even quicker when we start to see issues, and how we use that stat model to do that. But I'll let Dan walk through the stats. The other thing that you're not going to see is with the agency performance plans, while they will not be stats, it will still be, I need your executive team in this room meeting with the mayor and the city administrator and the deputy mayor answering questions about your agency performance plans. So we're using the model throughout this process.
Sure, and I want to, because I think this is important to sort of differentiate. I think we are using data to make decisions. I think we are looking strategically at problems that we identify to use a sort of stat type model to attack those issues, and I think that's great. I think we're not doing that for our city agencies that deliver basic city services.
We do.
Hear me out.
Okay.
We're not doing that for our city agency. We're not doing it for all city agencies. So I've listed out the 10. Mm-hmm. Fire, finance, DGS, police, health, housing and community development, DPW, including solid waste and water and wastewater, rec and parks, and the Department of Transportation. These are things that people deal with every single day. We get millions of service requests year in, year out, yep. And it comes to these agencies in some way, shape, or form. These are the things that people are interacting with. And so a lot of the stuff that these agencies need to do are very simple. Processing payments or filling potholes, things like that, making sure that's happening on time, and when it's not, understanding why it's not. I think another really, really important example that comes to mind for me, because we dealt with this in this particular, in this committee, was with the fire department. Mm-hmm. And I know, as I understand, we very recently started doing fire stat again.
We have fire EMS stat, we have a fire dashboard.
Right, and we recently started that again. That was recent.
We built that dashboard
within the last three or 4 months, maybe. And I'm glad to hear that. But what we had to deal with here is it came to us that we didn't have enough apparatus such that we had people who were working but could not be out on the streets because of an issue like that. And ideally, in a stat process, when we're thinking about people calling out or people not being able to be on the streets, we would have identified that problem before. So I think it's these kind of issues that I think mm-hmm. That's what the stat process is for.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is what we use the stat process for. So there's a lot to unpack.
Not to respond to a problem that has already happened, but to identify a problem before it's happened.
Right. So yes, absolutely. So there's a lot to unpack with that. So going back to basic city services. So we recently launched our city services blitz focused on basic city services. We actually are having a stat focused specifically on basic city services, potholes, resurfacing, illegal dumping, and what is the fourth one? Graffiti removal. Of course you remember. Yeah. Graffiti removal, for example. But that work was still covered within CleanStat, right? CleanStat is a stat where we focus on some of the most basic city services with DOT, DPW, rec and parks, tree trunk removal, right? So I don't want it to appear as though we don't have stats that are focused on basic city services. We absolutely do. I think all of the agencies that you named, I can tell you different ways that either we are doing a stat, they're connected to a stat, or that our OPI team is working with each and every single one of those agencies. So for example, Rec and Parks, I already talked about how they are a part of CleanStat. They also have their own Rec Stat that will be engaging with the mayor around Rec Stat. Yeah, they have Rec Stat with the health department. So the health department is, they're not necessarily unique. One, we're focused with the health stat around our the partnership forum, the
The emergency.
The Emergency Medicine Partnership Forum is a partnership that we have with the health department. Obviously, we have and did a ton of work around our COVID dashboard. There's a ton of work that we've been able to do there. We're going to release our opioid dashboard as well, and have a renewed focus on opioid deaths, child fatality, right? Like, there are any number of things that I can point you to that we are already doing and working on with those agencies that either are a part of a stat, leverage a stat model, or we leverage our performance and innovation team to work with the agencies. So again, I think it's going to take different forms, and I don't want to be so prescriptive that it has to look like this, right? Meaning what a stat model or a stat program with agencies look like. What I think we can partner on, so I think this is what I want to make clear. We are aligned around performance and the need to use a stat model to drive performance improvements. And I think what we can talk about and make some agreements about is how we communicate that with you all, how you are involved in that, and what additional stats we can or should be adding to improve city services, for example.
So, Dan, you were going to walk through the stats. If you could very quickly walk me through the stats, how long we've been doing them, roughly, how often they meet, that'd be helpful.
Okay, you want this for each of these on this slide?
For each of the stats, yes.
Okay, so we list 7 here, and again, I would say stats or a performance management or data support process, where we're bringing data into a forum to help manage that issue. Our squeegee data support is something we've been working on since the start of the initiative at the start of the year. That is what, Councilman? Hey.
Squeegee data support is a stat?
Yeah, I would not call it a stat, but it is a performance. It is a process we're providing data to help manage that program. We are providing a weekly report that is the basis for managing that particular program.
So to that point, we meet weekly, every single Friday. It was 3 times a week, and Dan and his team provides me, the deputy mayor, the police commissioner, downtown partnership, Moaim, probably about 20 people, an update on data related to squeegeeing. So they look at calls for service. We look at different patterns of like where squeegee activity is popping up, right? So it is that same model that we use around the squeegee report.
Do you guys produce memos
Yes.
for all the stats?
Yes.
And do you have follow-up memos?
Yes.
And they go out to who?
They go out to whoever the meeting stakeholders are, the participating agencies who are part of that process.
Okay. So squeegee data report.
Yeah, so that's a weekly, that is woven into this squeegee collaborative process that the CA just referred to.
So you do weekly memos,
Correct.
not slide presentations, memos.
So when I consider this, our memos are in the form of slides. There are often words and analysis in the slides. So, yes, I know in the past, sometimes they have been, Word documents. We are now doing slides, but I still consider those to be memos. They have the same content and the same level of analytic rigor, in my opinion.
So this is, I think, a part where I think we may disagree, and simply because I think if you hand off a slide deck to someone, it doesn't necessarily tell you what was discussed in that meeting.
It does, though. So I think we should provide you a copy of, because it is, and I think when it comes out, it is called like follow-up memo. I forget what the title is. So again, and this is why I want to be very careful, right? Things have changed and evolved over time, right? And so instead of a formal memo in a traditional memo in the way that we used to do it 10, 15, 20 years ago, now it is the team puts it in a deck, but it is still the same content. It is still, you need to follow up on X. This is where we landed, right? Like it is actually built into the overall kind of a deck that we provide for city staff. So we should provide you examples of what the memos look like. And if you have feedback on what should be included in those memos that might not be, we're happy to take that feedback.
Sure, yeah, that works.
I mean, I don't know if we're getting too far into the weeds here. I mean, to some degree, this transitioned during the COVID era, where we are now often in hybrid meeting forms, and so you are some people joining virtually, and so really the core product that you are talking about is a slide deck that people are viewing in different ways. So again, I don't know if we want to.
The reason why I'm partial toward the memo setup is particularly because issues go back years sometimes, and how those issues are dealt with, strategies and tactics that we choose to address them with, and follow up from those, I think are really, really helpful for future analysts so that they can know how we got to where we are. Great slideshow here. I think this is helpful, but this is not a memo. And so, like, if this is, now, of course, we throw charts and data and numbers and so on and so forth on this instead, that doesn't tell you what we're driving toward and what barriers we're experiencing on the path to get there. So I think therein lies the sort of nuance, and I'm more than happy to provide that feedback. But yeah, we don't need to get in the weeds. If you could just go through the stats that we're performing, how often we meet for them, that would be helpful.
Youth violence stat, again, I think is another great example, as the CA spoke to, that we convened on very short notice, in response to, this emerging challenge. I think the cadence is still TBD. We held our first meeting, I believe, 6 weeks ago. We are having our third one tomorrow, as a matter of fact. I think TBD exactly on how, what the ongoing cadence of that meeting will be. But again, it brings together stakeholders from within government, but also other partners such as the school, city schools, school police, and others to come together around this issue. And again, there is a data component, and also a various processes that this stat has initiated that we are tracking and discussing in that forum. Police stat. I think I already mentioned in the presentation, this is held every 2 weeks for 2 hours. Can say more about that, and that's been going on since the start of this Scott administration. CleanStat, it has been biweekly. It's varied between biweekly and monthly. It brings together multiple agencies, as you're aware, and that this has also been run throughout this Scott administration. The Emergency Medicine Partnership Forum is a collaborative forum that brings together the EMS team at Fire, together with other stakeholders, including representatives from our Baltimore City hospitals, and we are looking at how to make improvements to the emergency medicine system, and in particular with a focus on what we can do about offload times at hospitals, such a critical, obviously, issue in the city. So we have been meeting monthly. We are probably switching to a quarterly cadence going forward. I can say more about that forum. We've been meeting, that meeting's been going on since September. SprintStat is about to launch, as the CA mentioned. That is around these focus areas that were announced as part of these new sprints that the CA referred to: graffiti removal, pothole filling, illegal dumping, and now I'm forgetting the fourth. And resurfacing. So again, we'll be doing that every 2 weeks, and again, that's starting imminently in the next week or so. Invoice payment stat, that's been going on for the last year, and that's a monthly forum that features pretty much all agencies that have a significant number of invoices that they deal with.
And how often does it meet?
Monthly. And you'll see, for each of these, as we've highlighted, these are issue-based. They're convened around a specific challenge area, as opposed to sort of, being a set stat around solely around one particular agency. And that is, again, in line with the way this administration has chosen to use stat, and again, complementing the forthcoming agency performance planning process, which will include performance review meetings and a look at how agencies are performing against those determined metrics and targets identified in those plans.
Thank you. Any questions? Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one, you had asked for some suggestions about what might also be, whether it's stated or performance plan, I don't know. I think it's really important that we do a 6-month analysis on the in-rem process. We had the first hearings in November, and it's May. There are still challenges happening with getting cases through. I'm not going to be specific here because I don't want to embarrass anybody. But it's really important that we get that right. And I'd love to be a part of that if that's at all possible, because this is going to be the tool that we will be the city will be relying on to have property acquisition for vacant properties. And I just want to get it right. So I think it's important to have an in-rem stat meeting, whatever, but that is, we have a lot of stats for all the city's priorities. To me, and to many others, that the issue of vacant properties is very high on the priority list, and making sure that that tool works is important. Thanks. That's all, Mr. President, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Let's see. Are there any questions from colleagues joining us virtually? Councilman Cohen, Councilman Burnett. Sorry I missed you guys there for so long.
What I was going to ask has been covered already pretty extensively on your line of questioning around sort of the similarities and differences between your bill and what's already happening. So, yeah, I'm good, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman.
I'm good as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I had a couple of questions for the law department, actually, with some of the proposed amendments. And I will try to get down to my notes on here. Some of the amendments proposed made some pretty significant structural changes, one of which I noted would eliminate the ability for the office to create new stats that invite outside partners, federal and state. And the sort of argument there was that it couldn't preempt federal and state
Right.
agencies preempt, of course, the city.
Right. It's one of those things that you can't legislate, but in practice you can do. Right? You can't make a law. It's kind of like, it's like the First Amendment, and government may make no law. As long as the government's not making a law and not regulating, it can be a market participant. It has a lot more rights as an executive and a lot less rights as a legislature. So once you write it down, you've put into your law a law that conflicts with their law. There's nothing wrong in practice with inviting people to show up. The problem is writing it in the law that conflicts with their law. That's the issue.
So could we theoretically just soften the language and say that the Office of City Stat has the ability to hold stats with agencies or call stats with agencies and invite outside partners, including federal?
Sure. I mean, again, that's fine, but they already have that power. You're not giving them something they don't have, but if you want to say it, go for it.
Yeah, I think because one of the concerns that I think CEO Leach has brought up was the ability to be nimble and to create new stats as necessary. And I think I want to make sure we keep that available. And if, for instance, if we didn't put it in there, would there be anything to stop the office from doing so?
No, I mean, it's just an invitation, right? The feds, the state, the private companies, they can't be compelled to show up. But if they want to come, I mean, it sounds like hospitals want to come to whatever that stat was. They can show up if they want.
We have some of those partners that come now. So, for example, around the youth violence stat that we do, we actually have MTA police that they asked us to be a part of a stat because they do their own stat. So, like, we already do invite some of those partners to participate.
Good. All right, that's great. And then the other question I had was regarding, I think it was the amendment number 4 regarding the ability to, one, share data online, and then 2, requiring agencies to share data with CityStat.
Right.
Or to require that they have
Sure.
the ability to request or otherwise. I want to make sure as best as possible that CityStat has the ability to request that data or get that data in some way, shape,
It
or form.
depends, right? So the Maryland Public Information Act governs what each record custodian can share with another, even within a government. So for example, let's say the CAO wanted to see my personnel file. Technically, she's in my chain of command, so that's probably okay. You want to see it? Not okay. You don't hire and fire me. And it's the same with every data point. So for example, we run into this, I mean, I'm happy to send you the one pager we give to agencies who do this all the time. I can tell you an example. One time, a certain agency, I think it was housing, wanted to see which buildings had only minimum water billing to identify vacants. And unfortunately, that wasn't able to be done with the way that DPW has used the sociological exemption in the PIA. So that data couldn't be shared, but there was a way around it. So each data point has to be reviewed separately. So for example, a PowerPoint slide may be something that's much more easy to share than a narrative Word document, right? Because once something includes the deliberative thoughts of the executive, that's usually not shared outside of the person making the decision. So, for example, fire could probably quite easily share a lot of stuff with, the agency that it may not be able to share publicly, but there might be things they can't see. For example, if they wanted to drill down and say, okay, well, you're showing me one person with one overdose at this corner. Well, who was it? They can't share that. They can't share that with anybody, let alone, CityStat, anybody else. So it just depends on the data point. And we get this all the time. It's not a happy medium because, at least in Maryland, there's no one record custodian in a government. So, I have one client, but I probably, 50 plus record custodians? You're the custodian of your own records. There's stuff that you could be required to share with the council president, but not vice versa. So that state law pretty much preempts what we can say locally. We can't permit sharing that state law doesn't allow, and we can't prevent sharing that state law does allow. We're just sort of stuck with that state law governs all of it. So again, it's not that data couldn't be published, it's hard to make a law that would work in all situations, if that makes sense.
That does, partially. I think there are two things I'm thinking about here. One is sort of transparency within the stat process, within reasonability. I do think we want some data shared, but I think we want to make sure that there's enough protection within the stat program that they can talk about issues that they need to address that may be sensitive.
Right,
so that they can get
and
to
state law
solutions.
already sets out the do's and don'ts on that. So there's not anything that they are not able to do now because they don't have a local law, or vice versa. There's nothing you can locally permit them to do that they can't already do. So there's just not a lot there to add. They already have whatever permissions they have and whatever restrictions they have.
And then I think there's a second issue here, and this is requesting information from other city agencies.
Right, the same law applies.
And so with it being within the sort of direct line of the CAO's office, does that allow for that greater ability to request certain information of agencies?
Yeah, as the CAO, the charter gives the CAO the power to be in charge of everyone, reporting to the mayor so that structure's down. The charter already sets forth the structure. So, for example, this new office can't supervise people. The CIO can supervise people, or the mayor can supervise people, and they can use this office to do that. When you talk about data, she's going to be able to see most of what all these agencies have, but there's going to be data that she'll never be able to see. It doesn't matter if you set this office up one way or the other. So it's already built in. I will say from my experience, most of the stuff that they're requesting, they can not only see, but could probably publish, but not everything.
Right.
You know, it just depends. But again, I mean, I can't imagine most of the stuff, you know, it's not a problem in practice, it's a problem in legislation. That's really, it's same with the, you know, it's like in practice, they follow the rules. Writing it down, all of a sudden, you're running up against a state law that already provides the framework. So it's sort of like, well, I mean, you could just say in accordance with state, you know, in accordance with the PIA and add that everywhere. That's fine. I mean, that'll, you know, it's redundant. I mean, you could add that if you prefer to do it that way. That would work.
And then I think last question, referring to a part of the report, was its conflict with the components of the charter regarding the police department.
Right. Well, that one's a hot mess. I mean, we just don't know. And so I didn't put anything in here to say you couldn't do it. But again, I mean, and now that the General Assembly session's over, there was no change to the city's Article 2 powers. So what does that mean is anybody's good guess.
So
the
this would
AG's
be
opinion was clear
this
as
would
mud.
also be a test of that.
In practice, it may not come up.
Okay.
And also, right, and let's be real. I mean, you don't get to court unless someone complains.
Right.
I mean, so who knows? You know, if again, it's kind of like, you know, the federal governments, the private entities, the state, whatever, they can always show up and participate. The problem becomes sticking it in a law, like, but what you have right now, there's nothing on its face that appears to be problematic, but I wouldn't be doing my job if I wasn't saying, you know, FYI, you know, 5 years from now something happens and you go, well, why didn't you tell me? Well, I mean, it could be a problem, but what you've got on your face, and really that's all I'm looking at, is just the face of the document, like which lines are violating existing laws. This one's a hot mess. I really can't tell you. I can't. I mean, so,
No, we got to fix. Well,
you know, it's
not
in there,
really.
but I don't know what to tell you.
Thank you. That helps a lot.
No problem.
Any other questions before we go to public testimony? All right. Madam CEO or otherwise, any other questions, thoughts?
No.
I before we go to public, I just want to say, you know, I think this is really important, and you know, clearly there's a little bit of disagreement here, and I want to find a way to get to yes, because I think this is really, really important for city operations, and I know, you know, we're all trying to make sure the city is doing its absolute best and greatest. We all want the best for the city, and knowing the success of the program at its heights, I think it's important that we find ways to make sure we have systems that work, and fortunately, and more specifically, systems that work no matter who mayor or CAO or chair of the Public Safety and Government Operations Committee is, systems that just are systems that work well. And when I think about, and I'll even say, I don't care if, no, maybe I shouldn't say that. The cost to the program, our budget is $3.5 almost billion, $3.5 billion, and the efficiencies that we might receive by using data and regular check-ins and updates with city agencies to improve outcomes, that is a drop in a bucket to see a $600,000 cost. Now, I'm arguing it might be less than that, but nonetheless, I think we want to find a way to get to better operations in the city and more consistently, so that we're always improving, that we don't have to think about this next time around, that the next mayor that comes in and the mayor after that and the mayor after that have systems that are stable and structured in a way that makes sense. And you know, I think this is one way to start. So with that, we're going to turn it over to public testimony. Let's see, do we have anybody in the room? There's nobody in this room because this is a very exciting meeting and, you know, everyone wants to join us virtually. If you are interested in testifying virtually, please use the raise hand function. We'll give 2 minutes to everyone who wishes to testify. And we're open up for testimony. All right, I'm going to leave it open for another 10 seconds before we close up public testimony. And seeing no hands raised, want to thank you guys for the discussion. Clearly, we have a lot more to work out here. I know we're going into budget season, and Madam CEO, you and I we had a number of conversations before this hearing about this bill, even before it was fully drafted. I think it's important that we think about some of these questions as we go into the budget season. So I would like to, move this forward or find a way to make decisions on this, as soon as possible. And I think some of this could happen regardless of the decision in the bill. But, I think this would be really, really helpful for us. So with that, thank you all, and I look forward to following up with each of you later on.
Thank you.
Thank you.